Ethan Carter had built an empire from nothing, yet even as CEO of one of the nation's fastest rising companies, his life often felt hollow when he left his glass-walled office late at night and returned to a quiet home where only his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, filled the silence with laughter and love. He had learned to balance boardrooms and bedtime stories, but ever since his wife Claire had passed away, a lingering emptiness followed him like a shadow, and that evening, needing air more than his chauffeured car, he walked through a quieter part of the city where streetlights flickered and the cold wind whispered through alleys, and that's when he noticed her, a young woman hunched on a bench beneath a dim lamp, wrapped only in a thin hospital scrub jacket, her shoulders trembling against the biting chill, a small, worn duffel bag by her side, her eyes alert yet heavy with exhaustion, her posture dignified despite her situation. Ethan might have walked past, telling himself it wasn't his business, but something about the way she stared into the dark tugged at him, reminding him of the weary nurses who had once cared for Claire during her last nights, offering kindness when his own strength had failed, and he found his steps turning toward her before he could question it, his voice breaking the quiet as he asked, "Are you all right?" She startled, looking up with wide eyes, then forced a small smile and murmured, "I'm fine," though her shaking hands betrayed her words, and when Ethan pressed gently, "Do you need help?" she hesitated, her pride warring with desperation, before admitting softly, "I'm just between places right now." "I'll manage." Ethan recognized the phrase, a fragile veil for homelessness, and something within him refused to walk away, so he asked her name, and when she whispered, "Rachel," he repeated it with warmth and told her, "Rachel, I know you don't know me, but it's freezing out here, and I have a guest room in my home, I promise it's safe, and you'd be doing me a kindness by accepting," yet she shook her head, whispering that she couldn't impose, that she'd be a burden, but Ethan thought of Lily asleep at home and how he'd never forgive himself if he left someone's mother, sister, or daughter to face the night alone, so he pressed again, his voice steady with conviction, until at last Rachel's defenses cracked under the weight of her exhaustion, her eyes filling with unshed tears as she whispered, "Just for tonight," and Ethan nodded gently, offering his hand and a reassuring smile as he said, "Come on then, let's get you warm," unaware that in that single act of kindness, an invitation spoken under the cold glow of a street lamp, he had just altered not only Rachel's future, but his and Lily's as well, for that was the night a weary nurse and a lonely single father began a journey neither of them could have imagined. When Ethan led Rachel into his home, she froze at the doorway, taking in the warmth of a house that felt both elegant and lived in, its walls lined with family photos, a child's drawings taped to the refrigerator, and the faint smell of cinnamon lingering in the air, all of it so different from the cold streets she had been calling her shelter, and though she hesitated, clutching her bag as if ready to run, Ethan's quiet assurance, "You're safe here," helped her step inside, just as a small whirlwind in the form of Lily bounded down the hallway, her curls bouncing as she exclaimed, "Daddy, you're late," before noticing Rachel, curiosity lighting her young face as she asked, "Who's this?" and Ethan, crouching to her level, explained, "This is Rachel, she's our guest tonight," to which Lily, without hesitation, grinned and chirped, "Hi, Rachel. Want some hot chocolate?" leaving Rachel blinking back sudden tears at the innocent generosity, nodding softly as she whispered, "I'd love some," and soon she was sitting near the fire with a steaming mug in her hands, feeling warmth seep into her bones for the first time in weeks, while Ethan studied her, seeing not just a stranger but someone carrying the weight of battles fought quietly. Eventually, her pride gave way to honesty, and she confessed her story, how she had once been a nurse, working endless shifts during the pandemic, holding hands of patients who had no family, how she'd lost her mother not long after, how bills had swallowed her meager savings, and when her landlord sold the building she lived in, she had nowhere left to go, forcing her to drift between temporary clinic shifts and nights on the street, a truth she had hidden behind polite smiles. Ashamed to admit that someone meant to save lives had failed to save her own stability, her voice cracked as she said, "Nurses are supposed to be strong, not end up like this," and Ethan, his heart tightening, shook his head firmly, telling her, "Hardship doesn't choose who it touches, Rachel, you gave everything to others, and now it's time someone is there for you," words spoken with such conviction that she couldn't hold back the tears she had been burying for months, her sobs filling the quiet room while Ethan simply sat nearby, offering no judgment, only presence, and in the days that followed, though she promised herself she'd find her own place soon, Rachel slipped naturally into their lives, helping Lily with homework, bandaging scraped knees with gentle hands, cooking meals that filled the house with the scent of home, her laughter mingling with Lily's as if it had always belonged there, and Ethan, though careful not to overstep, found himself watching the way Rachel smiled, how she carried both strength and fragility, and realized with a quiet ache that the woman who had stepped into his house out of necessity had somehow made it feel more alive than it had in years, even if she still believed she was only there temporarily. Time moved differently in the Carter household after Rachel's arrival, weeks blurring into months until her presence no longer felt temporary but as natural as sunlight streaming through the windows each morning, for she had woven herself into the fabric of their lives with small, quiet gestures, braiding Lily's hair before school, leaving encouraging notes in her lunchbox, humming softly while preparing dinner, and listening with patient understanding when Ethan came home exhausted from long days at the company, where endless boardroom battles left him drained, yet all his weariness seemed to lift the moment he found her waiting in the kitchen, apron dusted with flour and a smile she didn't even realize she carried, and though Rachel insisted she would eventually move out once she saved enough, Ethan's heart sank at the thought, for Lily's laughter was brighter now, filled with the kind of joy only Rachel's warmth seemed to spark, and he himself had discovered a peace he hadn't felt since Claire's passing. One quiet evening, after Lily had been tucked into bed, Ethan found Rachel at the sink, sleeves rolled up, humming a tune as she washed dishes, and the sight stopped him, so ordinary, yet so intimate that it tugged at something deep inside, making him cross the room slowly until he was close enough to say, his voice low, "You know, I can't remember the last time this house felt this alive," which made Rachel pause, her hands still in the soapy water as she answered softly, "It's not me, Ethan, it's Lily, she's extraordinary," but he shook his head gently, countering, "It's both of you, you've given us something I didn't realize we were missing," and when their eyes met, the air between them seemed to thrum with something unspoken, her heart racing even as fear gripped her, for she couldn't imagine deserving such closeness after all she had lost, and so she tried to retreat into gratitude, whispering, "I don't want to overstay my welcome," yet Ethan stepped closer, his tone firm but tender as he replied, "You're not overstaying, Rachel, you're home," words that struck her to her core, silencing the doubts she had carried, and though she said nothing more that night, her heart had shifted, opening a little more to the possibility that perhaps she did belong here. In the days that followed, their bond deepened in countless small ways, shared jokes while cooking, quiet walks to the park with Lily, long conversations over coffee where Ethan spoke of his fears as a father and Rachel admitted her guilt over the patients she couldn't save, each exchange weaving a thread of trust and affection between them until it became clear that what had started as an act of kindness had blossomed into something far more fragile, far more powerful, and though neither dared to name it yet, their hearts were already intertwining in ways that promised their lives would never be the same again. Winter came with its biting winds and snow-draped streets, and though the Carter house glowed with warmth, one evening tested the fragile peace they had built when Lily fell ill with a sudden high fever, leaving Ethan gripped by a familiar terror that clawed at old wounds, memories of losing Claire rushing back in suffocating waves until his hands trembled and his voice cracked as he called Rachel, who rushed to Lily's side with calm precision, her nurse's training returning as naturally as breathing. She sponged Lily's forehead, coaxed her to sip water, and spoke soothingly to both father and daughter, her steady presence anchoring Ethan when he felt as though the ground was breaking beneath him, and when he finally whispered, "What if I lose her too?" Rachel looked him in the eyes, her voice firm but kind as she said, "You won't, Ethan, trust me," and in that moment, he did, letting someone else bear the weight for the first time in years. When Lily's fever broke hours later, relief washed over them like a tide, and Ethan realized with startling clarity that Rachel wasn't just helping them through a storm, she had become their safe harbor, their family, whether she believed it or not. And a few days later, as they shared dinner around the table, Ethan finally gathered the courage to speak the truth, his heart pounding as he set down his fork and looked at her with a mixture of fear and hope, telling her, "Rachel, I know you came into our lives by chance, but I can't imagine them without you now. You've healed parts of me and Lily I thought were broken forever. Would you stay? Not as a guest, but as part of us," and Rachel, stunned, shook her head at first, tears welling as she whispered, "Ethan, I don't have much to give," but before Ethan could answer, Lily piped up, her small voice filled with certainty as she jumped from her chair and wrapped her arms around Rachel, saying, "Please stay, Rachel, you're like my mom," words so pure they broke through every wall Rachel had left, and as she held the child close, she lifted her gaze to Ethan, seeing not pity in his eyes but love, real and steady, and with trembling lips she whispered, "Yes. I'll stay," a single promise that sealed the unspoken bond they had been building for months, and in that moment, the house felt fuller, brighter, alive with the kind of belonging Rachel thought she had lost forever, while Ethan knew that the greatest success of his life wasn't the empire he had built but the family he had found anew, and so, from a chance meeting under a cold street lamp, a homeless nurse, a lonely single dad, and a little girl who needed a mother found each other, and their lives, once broken by loss and circumstance, were forever changed by the simple power of love and second chances.